giving you the worst of me. Now you wanna stay the night. Pretty how you work hard for me. Why forgetting how to talk? That I don't like no hobbies. Just go and suss it up. Now it's time to marinate and right after we're done. I've been giving you the worst of me.
Hello, I'm Greg with Brownlow Writes. Today we're going to be looking at the Short Action Customs Inline Infinity Bullet Seater. The Infinity die from Short Action Customs is designed to be a universal modular inline seating die. Some of you may not know the difference between an inline die and a traditional die. A traditional bullet seating die typically has a 7/8 14 threaded interface, and it will either be screwed into your press directly or you will use some form of adapter that goes into your press. These types of systems would be familiar to anyone running a Forster coax press, or perhaps one of the Hornady lock and load type setups. This style of bullet seating die has come to incorporate kind of a sliding sleeve type system, where there's a sleeve that's installed in the die that closely resembles your chamber, and it supports the case, and the sleeve actually moves up and down. With an inline die, there is no threaded interface. It's designed to just sit flat on a base, and then you would use some form of press to push the bullet seating stem, which moves up and down. So in an inline die, rather than some sliding sleeve that supports the case and moves up and down, the body of the die is dimensioned closely to the chamber of the cartridge that you're reloading for, and the bullet seating stem is what actually moves up and down. Historically, with an inline die, you would use some form of an arbor press to actuate the seating stem plunger. There are some bench-mounted presses that have been developed that do have an inline die seating station in them, but my chosen press for using inline dies is the AMP press. You have probably seen some recent content where I showed the prowess of the AMP press and being able to provide very detailed graphs that can give you a very detailed look at exactly what is happening during the bullet seating op. I'm a big fan of the inline bullet seating dies, not just because I can use them with the AMP press, but because geometrically they tend to make some very straight ammunition. The Infinity die from Short Action Customs is designed to be one die to rule them all type situation. The list of compatible cartridges that the Infinity die can successfully seat bullets with is probably the longest of any seating die ever in history. You can find a list of the majority of these cartridges on the Infinity die sales page on the Short Action Customs website. There are quite a few cartridges that are not listed that will probably work fine with the Infinity die, but frankly, it is such a versatile seating die that listing all of the available cartridges would be a very difficult problem. To start with, you would choose the correct base for the type of case that you're shooting, and you want to make sure that there's a nice tight fitment between that, so you don't want it, sliding around side to side. You want it to fit in there nice and snug. Next, you want to make sure you have the correct centering sleeve in here. Now, this centering sleeve inside the die indexes off the shoulder, and it makes sure that the case is centered in the die. Once you have the correct centering sleeve chosen, you would then grab your appropriate seating stem. Now, the seating stems are specific to each of the sleeves. So if you have a smaller diameter sleeve, only the smaller diameter bullet seater stems will work. Next, you'll select the correct length push rod so that you can get your bullets seated to the correct depth that you want. Now, the correct one, you'll just have to kind of experiment with that based on the length of your bullet and the length of your cartridge, because the distance from the base to the rest of the die is set by the base height. So different cartridges will require different push rods. We're going to go ahead and change out the centering sleeve to the smaller one here. The larger one is installed by default.
Warning. Pay special attention to this part of the video.
Now, before we get into that, there's something extraordinarily important that I have to share with you. This half and this half of this die are essentially snug fit pushed on here, and they're held by an O-ring. So if you were to grab this part of the die and this part and then pull them apart, you would have something very catastrophic happen. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to grab both halves, and you can see how the die just separates like this. And this is the part where disaster would have struck already, because inside this little pocket is 2 springs and a detent. And there's another one right back here. Now, if you ever grab this die and you pull them apart the way that I am doing here, those springs and detents will go flying across the room, and you will never see them again. And they may shoot you in the eyeball or something like that. So folks, please do not do this. Do not pull the die apart the way you are seeing me do here. There is no need to ever do that, and you definitely do not want to. Now, I had spoken to Alan at Short Action Customs before receiving this die, and he specifically warned me not to do this. Me being me, of course, well, why did he warn me about that? I wonder, surely I can figure this out. So I started pulling on this, thinking that I could get it to just kind of gently slide open, and I'd be able to have a little look there and see how it worked. Folks, yeah, these things went flying across the room at light speed. And I had to go and get another one of these little spring and detent kits. So I repeat, folks, do not ever pull this die apart. Do not pull it apart. It does take some force, but once it rolls over the little O-ring, that O-ring kind of compresses and it just shoots open, and there's no real controlling it. So it's best, folks, if you just don't pull this thing apart. Now, if you do happen to do that because the curiosity got the better of you, you will be able to go on and order a replacement set, but it will cost you something. They will not be replacing these things for free. So you have been duly warned. Now, the reason I got into that is this has no clicks in it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the bottom of this, and I'm going to turn the top of the die counterclockwise. And I'll do that, and you'll see how this all of a sudden started spinning with it. That means that this threaded portion is disengaged. So I'll grab it and I will turn it clockwise because it's reverse thread. So I'll turn it clockwise until it comes out. You can see these slots that are in this. Yeah, those slots line up with a keyway that is inside there. There's a key that rides in these keyways around the circumference of this, and that's what allows this to go up and down when we thread the top portion. So now that I've done that, I'll flip the die over and I'll get our centering sleeve. Now you can see this centering sleeve is much larger diameter, and we'll just drop the smaller one in there. Now I will put this back on here, and remember it's reverse thread, so I'm going to have to get it going counterclockwise now, and eventually I'll hit the keyway. And right there, see, it just kind of stops turning. Once I get the key lined up, because it won't really allow me to draw this down in there. Once I get it where they're going to line up, I'll hold this top while turning this clockwise. So you can see I hold this in position and I just turn the top of the die. That allows this thing to grab a hold, and then I can use the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey method to get that drawn back down in there. Now, once the sleeve has been changed, and I can install this in the sleeve before I drop it in there, but I'll select the correct bullet seating stem that I want to use and just drop it down in the hole and make sure that it centers up in there and falls into place. Now, this cartridge that I'm running here is going to be very short. It's a BRA based case, and so I'm going to use the long push rod. And that's it. I've changed out my sliding sleeve. Now, if you don't need to change the centering sleeve, you can just swap the bullet seating stems. Now, all of the large stems are compatible with this centering sleeve, so you can swap all 4 of them depending on the bullet that you're using. Now, this should be hilarious watching me try to get these detents back in here. Well, suffice it to say, folks, if I had any brains, I'd be doing this inside a little baggie of some kind, because no doubt these things are going to be under tremendous pressure when I get them in here. I'm apt to just lose these things all over again. So you can watch me have a disaster. This is just more to the lesson. Don't ever pull this die apart, because these little guys are just not very fun to deal with. Okay, so I'm just going to hold that one in there, and I'm going to set the springs in this one. I need to push both of these in simultaneously. And it's not like they're really easy to push in, folks. I'm going to use a tool to help me out with this side, I think. There we go. Okay. Oh, I can breathe. Okay. So now I have clicks once again. Now you can see here how my indicator doesn't really line up. It's in between clicks a little bit, right? Well, you can fix that. So all I have to do is grab this little ring, and I can set the 0 wherever I want. So you can make those things line up just perfectly. Now, folks, this works just like your typical inline die. So if you want the bullet to seat deeper, clockwise. If you want the bullet seated out more, you turn it counterclockwise. All of these bullet pushers come with a little O-ring in this little slot right here. And I've taken that out just because I don't want the O-ring to interfere with my force measurement on my amp press. So if you're running an amp press, I would strongly encourage you to remove the O-ring. Now, it does have the detriment that if you flip it upside down and you're not holding on to things, well, your push rod and your bullet seating stem will just fall out the top of the die. So you'll want to be very cognizant of that. On the left, we have a standard base plate for an L.E. Wilson style bullet seater. And the seater just kind of sits inside this little cup like this. One issue that I've kind of always had is you never really know where the middle is, and so you just kind of put it in there wherever. And then, you know, this case is full of powder when we're going to go seat our bullets. And so you go to put the bullet on top of it, and you got to be very careful because if this thing falls over, you have a potential of having powder go everywhere, and there's really nothing to support it. And what I really like about the Short Action Customs style bases is it eliminates this cup, and this cup is just kind of useless, whereas this is cartridge case specific. So depending on your specific bolt face diameter, you would use the correct one. Obviously, they have these in all different sizes, and so like here is a 20 BRA, and then here is my 7 Norma Mag Improved. And so I really like how this thing is got some weight to it, and you drop the case down in there and it's fully supported. So you don't have to worry about your case tipping over, and you'd really have to do something very, very clumsy in order to lose some kernels of powder when you're going to seat the bullets. So these little bases and the way that they capture the case like this is just a really, really good idea. If you own a competition primer seater and you're seating your primers correctly, you would never need this feature, but it does have a hole through the middle so that if you ever did have a primer sticking up above the base of the case, it wouldn't get mashed by this when you seated the bullet. It would just kind of float in free space like that, because the case is very centered, as you can see here. And so you'll never have anything get in between there or debris from inside cause the primer to get hit while you're seating a bullet. These little tiny cartridges that have these little tiny dies like this, oftentimes it can be difficult to get a fine enough calibration on your amp to where it'll detect these little tiny ones when you're trying to do the auto run. Whereas I find the big, beefy Short Action Customs die here is a lot heavier, and I have never had a problem with detection with this die. Obviously, you need to have your amp tuned very effectively to make sure that you can even read these, but it can be a little tricky and a little finicky, and you really have to have it just dead on as far as the positioning of that load cell. Whereas the Short Action Customs die, being that it's so much heavier, is just quite a lot easier for the press to detect. Folks, some products are just really easy for me to give a recommendation to buy, and this is certainly one of them. And you might be asking, well, how do you know that it's good? You just got it. Well, here's the prototype. I've been using this prototype for months. And so any of the things that I found even marginally deficient in this one have been fixed in this one. So the largest cartridge that I shoot is a 7 Norma Mag Improved. And the smallest cartridge that I'm shooting these days is a 20-23 Ackley. And I have tested the Infinity bullet seating die with all of those cartridges, as well as everything that I run in between, and it has delivered some very predictable and consistent results. So the utility here is definitely something that the Short Action Customs Infinity die has going for it. So depending on when I decide to post this video, this thing is either going to be available right now, or it will be on pre-order status still. Now, if I was a betting man, I would say that these things are going to be insanely popular. So I wouldn't wait for them to come in stock, folks. I would get your pre-orders in and do so in a very quick fashion. Now, suffice it to say, the production die that I have in my hands now I've only had for a few days. And realistically, I need to seat like all kinds of bullets through that thing before I can make any proclamation on what it's going to be capable of in terms of repeatability. Now, the cartridges that I have used it with, they have been extraordinarily repeatable. And I've been using the prototype die for many months, and so I don't expect there to be any problems in that, folks. I think this is something that's going to be a long-standing product where, several years from now, I'm still going to be recommending this as probably my #1 choice of inline bullet seaters for most people. That's all we have time for today, folks. I'd like to thank you for watching. I'd also like to take a minute at the end of this video to acknowledge just exactly what makes all of this possible. The lifestyle that I lead, the amount of shooting that I do in my pursuit of this discipline, the creation of all of this content, all of the credit for everything that you have ever seen here can come from 3 places, and that is God, His Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit within me. If you're watching this message, then you're watching it as a direct result of the things that I am allowed to do and the things that I am allowed to have. And while I do enjoy those things, there is nothing more important to me than my relationship with Jesus Christ. So if you're watching this and you haven't come to know the Lord, I'd encourage you to crack open a Bible. Just start reading anywhere. You might find that what you'll read will be exactly what you need.